For 10,000 years, the Space Wolves have loyally served the Emperor of mankind. They are a noble chapter of Space Marines, their coordinated savagery unequaled. Their warrior packs are hunters and slayers of heretics, mutants, xenos, and demons. There is no leashing them. The tendrils of the ice kraken cannot bind them. They are the wind that howls through the trembling forest. They are the ship that splits the storm. Theirs is the joy of warriors born. Theirs is the barking laughter in the face of monstrous evil, the spittle in its eye. Theirs is the grin that widens and the fangs that gleam. Theirs are the growls on the edge of hearing, the fur-draped shapes in the blizzard. It is their roars, the dog-frenzied flight, their runic blades that cleave, and their claws that rend. Do you sense the hairs on your neck standing, and the chill of ice spearing your heart? Do you see pitiless yellow eyes calculating your every weakness? You are being hunted. Are you afraid? They are the Emperor's executioners. You should be. The Great Wolf Logan Grimnar has, for over 500 years, presided over the Space Wolves chapter. As the carnage-filled 41st millennium nears its end and the 42nd looms, which promises to be even more bloody and brutal, the Old Wolf awaits the Wolftime from atop his throne on Fenris. Logan is one of the oldest warlords in the Imperium. Few make it to 7 centuries of life, and fewer still retain the vitality and determination to remain one of the most determined and fierce defenders of humanity at that age. He and his champions of Fenris have fought and bled across 1,000 campaigns against a countless number of foes. Despite the encumbrance of 7 centuries and 1,000 scars, Logan Grimnar is a man of unmatched, raw charisma. His penchant for leadership and war have made the Old Wolf one of the most decorated and revered commanders across the Imperium. Pair that with also being one of the most powerful and savage warriors on the battlefield, and you'll understand why he has earned the respect of anyone who has come to know his name, and why his followers follow him implicitly. The story of Logan Grimnar's life begins just as any Space Wolf's life begins, on the icy death world of Fenris. Fenris is a planet racked by snow and ice for the majority of its year. But once per orbit, it approaches ever closer to its star, the Wolf's Eye, which melts its frozen seas, and the heart of the world begins to pump out boiling magma, breaking its mantle. During Fenris's encounter with its sun, the planet is completely remade, as new land masses emerge and old ones sink beneath the seas. The human tribes endure and survive this brutal and radical yearly change by becoming brutal and harsh themselves. They sail across seas in search of new lands in which to settle, war with other tribes to claim their stake, or perish in the long winter to come. Only the strongest tribes and humans survive on Fenris. Logan Grimnar was no exception. The Old Wolf was once a young pup and warrior of the Ironblood tribe, one whose destiny would change forever, when during Fenris's time of changing, he and his tribe sailed to a landmass known as the Kraken's Spur. as it rose out from beneath the boiling ocean. Upon its shores, Logan and his tribe fought against the Sea Devil and Icefang tribes, and he soaked the rocks of the island with their blood. Inland, they entered the ruins of the Temple Morkai, where they were ambushed by Thorgil Icetooth and more of his Sea Devils. The Ironblood tribe was quickly overwhelmed and slaughtered to a man, until all that remained was young Logan Grimnar, an axe in each hand, hacking limbs and gutting any of the dozen warriors who tried to encompass him. Until at last, Thorgil himself challenged the lone survivor, and the two Reavers came to blows over the stacked corpses of their tribes. Unbeknownst to any of the combatants, a wolf priest from the Space Wolves chapter watched the ensuing conflict from high above the ruins of the temple. Fenrisian sagas record the wolf priest swearing that when Logan Grimnar split Thorgil's skull with his axe, he saw the shadow of a hulking power-armored giant with a flowing mane of hair rising up behind the victorious tribesmen. Just like many young men before him, Logan Grimnar was deemed worthy by the wolf priest to partake in the trials of Morkai. Should he succeed in these trials, he would be allowed to imbibe the Canis Helix and become an Astartes of the 6th Legion. The Canis Helix bonded with Logan as if it were merely something he had lost at birth and had finally been reunited with. His physical and martial prowess skyrocketed, and as a space marine, he took to the galaxy with as much ease as he had sailed the seas of his homeworld. But Logan Grimnar was different from his battle brothers, and he stood out among them to the eyes of the chapter's leadership. He wasn't just a cunning, brave, and fierce warrior. He employed his unmatched charisma just as exemplary as he wielded an axe, with old chapter records suggesting that his easy grin and ready jests earned him the trust of everyone he met. Even the old and cynical warmed to him. It would be only a century that passed that took Logan from a whelpling blood claw of the Space Wolves to an honored member of his great company's Wolf Guard. And when his Wolf Lord fell, it was Logan who was unanimously ascended to that rank of Wolf Lord. And it wouldn't be long until his meteoric rise and favor of all those in his chapter saw him upon the throne of Fenris as its chapter master, or Great Wolf, as the 6th Legion calls it. Great Wolf Logan Grimnar's first real test as the newly appointed chapter master would come in the form of an astropathic distress call from a hive world in the sector of Imperial space they were assigned to, an industrial planet called Armageddon. On Armageddon's surface, the Astra Militarum fought valiantly against the World Eater's traitor legion, the demons amassed in their army, and Angron, the demon Primarch himself. The first war for Armageddon would be the staging ground for Logan Grimnar's name to become synonymous with heroism to the wider Imperium. Coming to the aid of the beleaguered world, Logan led the entire Space Wolves chapter to Armageddon. Their intervention would be the only reason the industrial hub would live to serve the Imperium another day. Logan took command of the Astra Militarum Steel Legion forces on the planet. And together with his Space Wolves, they thwarted the Chaos forces time and again along the banks of the River Karen, through the force of the Great Wolf's will. As the World Eaters and their demonic allies continued to break themselves along the Space Wolves' steadfast lines, Angron and his personal guard of 12 bloodthirsters turned their attention to the east and toward Hive's Hell's Reach and Infernus. Here is where Logan Grimnar set himself apart from the great wolves that came before him. Here is where he showcased his wisdom, which was to be equal to his fearlessness and ferocity. Where his predecessors would have flung themselves into the fray against the demon Primarch and his demonic guard for personal glory and the thrill of the fight, Logan knew that doing so would simply not be enough. And so before he and his space wolves set to attacking Angron, a single piercing howl from the Great Wolf sprung his well-devised trap. In response to the howling signal, an entire brotherhood of Grey Knight Terminators teleported directly into the battle with Angron and his guard, just as Logan and his space wolves crashed in from the other side. This would be the defining moment that won the Imperium the First War of Armageddon. A reputation for being a brilliant warrior and tactician wouldn't be the only thing Logan Grimnar would leave Armageddon with. He would leave with 2 additional building blocks of his legacy. The first is the Axe Morkai, the weapon that became Logan's signature axe, a weapon with which he would take the lives of countless enemies of the Imperium. Taken from the champion of chaos, Acor Doomflare, after Logan slew him in single combat. He would use the axe for the rest of the Armageddon campaign, and have it reforged and dubbed the Axe Morkai upon returning to Fenris. The second was a war with the Inquisition itself. You see, when a planet's population is exposed to chaos, it is the Inquisition's duty, by law and imperial decree, to enact the Exterminatus Protocol upon the planet and its population. This was, of course, to prevent the truth of the archenemy and the demonic from spreading across the wider Imperium. Better to eradicate millions than have to scour the galaxy of billions. The use of Exterminatus on Armageddon, however, wasn't feasible, as the industrial function of the planet was far too vital to the Imperium. Regardless, the citizenry of Armageddon had to be purged, by order of Lord Kisnaros, the ranking Inquisitor in the sector. This was something that did not sit well with Logan Grimnar and the Space Wolves at all. In fact, he had organized the defense of Armageddon in such a way as to minimize the public's chances of being revealed the truth of the demonic, despite the heavy casualties it would inflict upon both the mortal and Astartes defenders. Thus, Grimnar made it clear he opposed the extermination of Armageddon's populace, protocol be damned. The Inquisition was already suspicious that the Space Wolves may intervene, due to their habit of paying Imperial authority little mind. They took Grimnar's stance as nothing more than an excuse for conflict with the Inquisition. But the truth of the matter was that Grimnar was genuinely sympathetic to the humans of Armageddon. Regardless of the protests made by the Great Wolf, Lord Kisnaros ordered the first phase of the purge to begin. For this, he ordered the evacuation of the people off Armageddon as a temporary security measure, and off-planet, they would receive mandatory vaccines that were in truth meant to euthanize instead of inoculate. Logan Grimnar and his Space Wolves had other plans, however, as they held an advantage over the Inquisition forces in space. When the transports were filled with Armageddon citizens, the Space Wolves would escort those ships to the system's Mandeville point, where they could activate their warp drives and flee into the Immaterium. The first shots of this war would be fired when the Inquisition realized the Space Wolves' motives, and a Grey Knights frigate destroyed one of the transport ships, killing all 400,000 of its passengers. Logan Grimnar immediately ordered all the remaining transports to make orbit simultaneously, and the Space Wolves placed their ships between the transport ships and the Inquisition's guns, with commands to not fire back under any circumstances. Lord Kisnaros tried bargaining with Logan Grimnar, but the exchange devolved into nothing more than insults and threats from either side. And so instead he ordered the Inquisition's fleet to open fire on any Space Wolf spacecraft interfering with their duty. But just as the Inquisition opened fire, the fabric of space began to ripple and split as Space Wolves' reinforcements materialized into the sector from the warp, giving Logan and his wolves overwhelming superiority in any exchange of blows that would come. This was enough to have Kisnaros back down, for now. But once the Space Wolves and their escorts of Imperial citizenry disappeared through the warp, the Inquisition began to hunt for them all the same. The following solar months, as the Inquisition continued to hunt their quarry, protected by the Space Wolves, would come to be known as the Months of Shame. Any Imperial worlds the fleeing fleet would gather supplies at, Kisnaros and his fleet would eradicate entirely, in fear that the taint of chaos was spreading from the people of Armageddon to any world they touched, or even nearly touched. Despite the discontent from fellow Inquisitors at Kisnaros' obsession at this hunt, and the treachery and deception he would employ many times to manipulate the outcome, and despite the growing numbers of Imperial losses as the Inquisition exterminated planet after planet in the Space Wolves' wake, everything would culminate when the Inquisition besieged the Space Wolves' home world of Fenris. This brutal internecine conflict would reach a boiling point when Logan Grimnar, finally arriving home to join the fight, would teleport onto Lord Kisnaros' ship and ultimately kill him. The Space Wolves, still filled with rage and ferocity at the attack of their homeworld, were not satisfied with leaving things with the death of Kisnaros. But before more blood could be spilt, the venerable dreadnought, Bjorn the Fell-Handed, teleported to the bridge and bade everyone to stop this madness. A truce was called, and thus ended the civil war between Space Wolves and the Inquisition, and the Months of Shame came to a close. The main thing to take away from this is, you remember this tale the next time someone tells you that only salamanders care about Imperial citizens. You tell them, Logan motherfucking Grimnar will go to war with anyone to have your back. There would forever be an even more apparent lingering suspicion and animosity between these two groups. But for now, the war would become cold rather than physical. As for Logan Grimnar, who we are still considering as Great Wolf and not Old Wolf yet, the growing legend of his story is only just beginning. Nearly 170 years had passed since the first war for Armageddon, and the Great Wolf Logan Grimnar led the Space Wolves on many campaigns and brought his Astartes and the Imperium many victories over the Xenos, heretics, and demon filth that plagued the Milky Way. But some wars and conflicts are greater than others, and the renown from them is told in and around all of Fenris's mead halls and campfires. One such of these sagas is the War of the Wolf, wherein Logan Grimnar and the champions of Fenris would not only land a crushing blow against the ruinous powers, but also prevent the desecration of their gene seed. After the Horus Heresy, Rabute Gilliman, Primarch of the Ultramarines, penned the Codex Astartes, which, in brevity, was to make the original Space Marine legions break down into smaller chapters, so that no one person had control over tens of thousands of Astartes warriors, in which to rebel or to do as they please. The Space Wolves weren't very excited to comply with these outlines, but nonetheless they did, but just the once. During the second founding, their successor chapter, the Wolf Brothers, were created. Unfortunately, Their gene seed was fatally flawed and unstable. It merged all the worst aspects of the Canis Helix and the curse of the Wolfen. The sole successor chapter of the Space Wolves was disbanded almost immediately, its gene seed destroyed, and its battle brothers given a grim set of choices by the Ordo Astartes: death in glorious battle, or the unending shame of execution. But before this final act could be carried out in its entirety, most of the Wolf brothers vanished into the depths of the galaxy. Now, it's rumored that Leman Russ warned the Wolf brothers of their impending doom, or perhaps even aided them. But regardless, the Space Wolves have kept a constant lookout for their long-lost brothers, and even secretly protected them in some cases. This brings us to the year 612 M41, when whispers reached the ear of the Great Wolf Logan Grimnar of rumors of one of these long-lost battle brothers. This news, however, wasn't the optimistic news it usually was, because this lost wolf brother was being hunted by Abaddon the Despoiler, and more specifically, Fabius Bile, who sought to harvest the flawed gene seed and mutate it and flaw it even further toward the machinations of chaos. But there are no better hunters than the Space Wolves, and it did not take Logan and the champions of Fenris long to locate the planet where the wolf brother was hidden. That planet was Lumerius, a frozen world of snow and ice orbiting dangerously close to the Eye of Terror. There, the wolf brother was imprisoned within the ice-encapsulated wreckage of a ship thousands of years old. But above Lumerius hung the Black Legion spacecraft, the Well of Souls, a Styx-class heavy cruiser, and it would need to be dealt with before Logan could make landfall and pry his lost brother from the clutches of chaos. The champions of Fenris would launch a multi-pronged boarding action against the Black Legion ship. Logan, his champion Arjak Rockfist, and his wolf guard would lead the spear tip of this attack. Arjak had served as Logan's champion for longer than most people's lifespan, and was a trusted friend for even longer. He was an incredibly large man, even before he tasted the Canis Helix, and grew to an even larger Astartes warrior. This unmatched strength allows Arjak to wield weapons of astonishing size. Thus, he serves as both enforcer and shield of the Great Wolf. Ranulf Ironfang and Ingvar Thunderbrow led a pack of Void Claws in their hulking Terminator armor and claws sharper than those of the great wolves of Fenris into the Well of Souls. Each hunting pack boarded the ship in separate sectors, and all fought towards the bridge in order to disable the ship. This meant fighting an outnumbered battle against the Black Legion itself, demons, a favored of Abaddon's lieutenants, and even a Helldrake in the process. But the champions of Fenris weren't known for their moniker just because they were the best and most elite fighting force on Fenris. No, they were one of the best fighting forces in the entire galaxy. And so, despite the overwhelming disadvantage they were in taking the attack to the enemy ship, they were successful in destroying the ship from the inside. Now, Logan Grimnar and his champions' campaign moved planetside. In order to reach the Wolf Brother, they would need to breach the wreckage of the old Void ship floating amidst the Polar Sea. Within the heart of this ship were vaults of thousands of stasis pods. The Wolf Scouts had indicated that their target was in one of these pods, and so that is where the champions of Fenris would strike. Logan surveyed the Auspex readings of the ship and noted that the bulk of it was hidden beneath the icy waves, and just below the surface was an ice shelf housing tunnels that would lead deeper into the ship's wreckage. This would be their point of entrance. First, an orbital bombardment to soften the Black Legion's forces, that were already entrenched around the wreckage came screaming from the heavens. Next came the drop pods, their doors exploding upon impact and releasing the champions of Fenris's Terminators to ferociously engage the enemy head-on, while Logan and his Wolf Guard attacked from the depths. As the battle above them raged on, Logan and his Wolf Guard would have an unexpected fight of their own, as their heightened senses began picking up on the sound of hissing and a grinding wail nearing ever closer to them. They would end up contending with and ultimately killing two Mauler fiends, with Arjak and Logan himself each landing a killing blow. Once they reached the stasis pod chambers, they discovered that a contingent of the Black Legion had already beaten them there, one led by Fabius Bile himself. The search for which pod held their long-lost brother would have to wait. The immediate threat was to prevent Bile and the Black Legion from finding it first, and the most direct method of accomplishing that was by slaughtering them. The thing about fighting space wolves, especially ones as ferocious and savage as Logan Grimnar and his Wolf Guard, is that they fight in packs. That's not to say other legions don't fight with numbers, they do, but even space wolves engaged in their own solo skirmishes in the scheme of a larger battle are so intrinsically cued to their packmates, be it their vastly superior olfactory senses literally deciphering attack moves before they happen, or simply the bond created from sharing the hunt with their battle brothers of decades and centuries. To fight one wolf is to fight a dozen, even if those dozen cannot be seen or appear to be engaged elsewhere. Such was the case for Fabius Bile, who is no pushover himself, but when he thought he had taken the upper hand in his duel with Logan Grimnar, it was Arjak Rockfist's unseen hammer that would displace Bile's killing blow and ultimately force his retreat. With the traitor forces routed, Logan and his Wolf Guard were able to find and secure the stasis pod that contained the lost wolf brother. Upon opening it with a drop of his blood, the Wolf Lord gazed in sadness upon the face of a lost, timeless brother. His snarling face frozen in time as the signs of the wolfen were apparent upon him. There would be no kindness found in awakening him, and so Logan ordered it returned to the Fang, where he could rest eternally, denied any redemption, but spared from the ruinous powers. The Old Wolf Logan Grimnar, the champions of Fenris, and even the entire Space Wolves Legion would continue to answer the call across the width and breadth of the Milky Way, even 3 millennia later. From skirmishes and wars small in size, to deploying the entire chapter to scour sectors or defend planets. If we were to go over every campaign the Old Wolf led, we would be here for quite some time. But there are a couple more worth mentioning before we catch up on our story in the 999th year of the 41st millennium. First, we'll head to Genosis Prime and Secundus, wherein the Eldar had slaughtered the population of the planet and its moon to a man. It was unfortunate for the Eldar, however, that Logan Grimnar's ship would be close enough to the system to receive its astropathic calls for aid. And unfortunate for the champions of Fenris, that a warp storm would shove them off course, delaying their arrival at Genosis by a full standard year. It would not be a rescue that the wolves would render, but it would be vengeance. Upon the moon's surface, Grimnar would display once again his immense talent for war. On the ground, the space wolves were at a disadvantage, not because they had a much smaller number, but because of the Eldari jet bikes and grav tanks gave them a massive edge in both speed and air superiority. Knowing this, Logan and his wolf guard fought their way into a nearby thicket, where the branches and vines could provide them with cover from the strafing attacks. The Eldari leader, Autarch Zephyrblade, knew that the Space Wolves would do this, and his trap was sprung. Throughout the small forest, nearly invisible webs of glinting wires were strewn about the trees and branches, leaving the Space Wolves and their still descending reinforcements essentially stuck in a snare from which they struggled to free themselves. While stuck in this trap, agile Eldar troops surrounded the wolves and attempted more hit-and-run attacks against them. Logan's tactical mind quickly found the answer to their conundrum. The Wolf Guard sealed their helmets, and the dreadnoughts stood in place, as the Old Wolf ordered their ship, Shadow of Fenris, to target an incendiary strike on their position. As the shadow of the bombardment darkened the sky, the Eldar forces assumed it was more reinforcements, who themselves would become ensnared in their trap. But when the cleansing fire came, through grit fangs the Space Wolves, locked in their heavy ceramite armor, would endure. But the nearby Eldar forces and the monofilament webs evaporated. No longer ensnared, and the Eldari forces discombobulated, the Space Wolves charged once more into the fight. The venerable dreadnought Xvald Warbringer carving a path through land and sky into the hearts of the enemy forces, where the champions of Fenris would slaughter their foes until Genosis was avenged.
Even in death, our duty to Russ and the All-Father goes on. In times of war and blood, I will wake from my slumber to bring ruin to the Imperium's foes once more.
Even in 933 M41, nearly 200 years after Genosis, the Old Wolf's exploits still continued to grow even more legendary as time went on, including leading the champions of Fenris to Midgardia to fight the undying legions of the Necron and Trazyn the Infinite himself, as the Necron Lord attempted to infiltrate the planet to liberate a shard of the Catan Nyadrazatha the Burning One. This immense effort took descending onto the surface of a poisonous planet, fighting through a literal horde of flayed ones, chasing the Necrons beneath the surface through an underground volcano, traversing into a pyramid ship of living metal, and nearly besting Trazyn in single combat before the Necron Lord was forced to abandon the world and flee. The Old Wolf Logan Grimnar's long tenure of leadership in the Space Wolves rivals that of the Primarch Leman Russ himself. 5 centuries. 5 centuries of leading by example, of leading from the front, and winning a countless number of conflicts for the sake of mankind, of coming to the defense of humanity, whether its enemies are within or without the Imperium. But now, the 41st millennium is in its final year and coming to a close, and Logan Grimnar rules from his throne in the Fang, awaiting the Wolftime, the end times, in which it is said their father, the Wolf King Leman Russ, will return, and set before them the greatest and most pivotal battle their chapter has ever seen. But old hatreds never die out. And while the Old Wolf awaits the return of his king, these hatreds fester. And in the closing months of the closing year of the millennium, these hatreds will lay siege to Fenris and the Fang itself. This is the wrath of Magnus the Red and the traitorous Thousand Sons Legion, coming for revenge for Prospero. Will Logan Grimnar, the champions of Fenris, and the entire Space Wolves chapter be able to defend their home from the brothers whose home they burned long ago? Will the Thousand Sons' retribution trigger the Wolftime itself? To cover the siege of Fenris and answer those questions, would be a whole video in itself. Until that video, I hope you've enjoyed this one. And if you did, consider giving it a like and a comment, or even subscribe to the channel if you're feeling up to it. Be good people.
Follow me, and I promise you glory and adventure. Follow me, and I promise that if you fall, your name will be sung for as long as the sons of Rus walk the stars!